I'd ask unanimous consent to vitiate said quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the coming weeks, Washington will spend an enormous amount of time arguing about immigration enforcement. There will be speeches, there will be statements, there will be plenty of noise. But beneath all of that, the debate before us is far simpler and far more serious. There are two visions competing for the future of this country. One vision holds that immigration law should be enforced, that borders matter, that citizenship means something, and that a nation has both the right and the obligation to decide who may enter, who may remain, and under what rules. The other vision treats our sovereignty itself as immoral. In that vision, borders are an imperialist evil. The law is a fascist oppression, and our identity as Americans is a source of guilt and shame rather than pride and celebration. All of these ideas are connected. For the kinds of people who are attacking federal law enforcement in the streets of Minneapolis. They believe that we don't deserve to enforce our laws as a nation because they believe we don't deserve to exist as a nation. They're not hiding the ball. You can hear it very clearly in their slogans, quote, "No one is illegal on stolen land," end quote. So that's what this is. It's a debate about whether the United States remains a nation or not. The rule of law is essential to the American constitutional order. It is the clearest, most visible expression of self-government. A people cannot enforce its own laws, cannot meaningfully govern itself. As much as some of my colleagues across the aisle wish it was, immigration law is not some break with long-standing norms. A country that cannot say who belongs cannot remain a country at all for very long. Every serious nation understands this. Throughout history, societies that endured were willing to defend their borders, uphold their laws, and insist that citizenship carried obligations as well as benefits, without apology or shame. To understand what's at stake, we must be honest, fully honest, about what the Democrats are demanding, what that vision would mean in practice, and why it represents a fundamental break with the idea of America as a sovereign nation. To understand what lies ahead, we must be honest about what the Democrats are demanding and what it would mean in practice. They speak the language of accountability, of oversight, of reform. Those words sound reasonable enough. They're meant to. But when you strip away the euphemisms, when you look at the substance rather than the slogans, the demands all converge on a single outcome: robbing us of the power to enforce our immigration laws. This is not by accident. It's the continuation of a project that has been explicit for years. Abolish ICE, they say. Defund ICE. Pick your slogan, it doesn't matter. It's all part of the same project. Open borders and uncontrolled, unvetted, unlimited mass immigration. In the left-wing worldview, anything less than this is unacceptable and an unacceptable crime against humanity. For them, the problem is not illegal immigration. The problem is any and every attempt to stop it. That worldview rejects a basic premise of nationhood, that a people has the right to decide who may enter, who may remain, and under what rules. It denies that citizenship carries meaning, that membership entails obligation, or that law applies equally to those who violate it. And when a society reaches that point, when it treats enforcement as an offense and anarchy as virtue, it begins to dissolve from within. The end state of this Democrat vision is plain as day. Maybe ICE continues to exist, but only in name. The law remains on the books, but only on paper. Illegal presence becomes permanent by default, not because Congress voted for it, but because enforcement has been made impossible. You don't actually have to pass a law called amnesty to get the same effect. But this is an abdication of our duty to the American people. To understand how this vision is being put into effect, how our immigration laws are being hollowed out without ever being repealed, we must look closely at the specific demands now being advanced and what each one is designed to accomplish. The Democrat vision doesn't begin by repealing the law. It begins by making enforcement personally dangerous and professionally impossible. It's clever, actually. It's twisted. They get to say, see, we don't believe in open borders. We're not repealing any of our fundamental immigration laws, because many of their demands aren't actually going after the law. They're going after the people tasked with enforcing it. But of course, as they know very well, that gets them the same exact outcome. And that's no accident. History teaches a simple lesson. If you want a law to die without repealing it, make its enforcement intolerable. I'm not going to spend much time debating the Democrats' demands for DHS as we roll into this 2-week debate, 3-week debate, 4-week debate, whatever it's going to be. There'll be plenty of time for that over the coming weeks. And I look forward to being on this floor dissecting each one of their proposals and how disastrous it would be for our country. But consider for a brief moment the demand that officers remove their masks and identify themselves publicly during operations. This is a clear and obvious attempt to intimidate and put our federal agents in harm's way. ICE officers are already being doxxed. Their names and addresses are posted online. Their families are harassed. Their homes are targeted. No one would demand this of narcotics officers, counterterrorism agents, or fugitive task forces, because we understand that exposing law enforcement to retaliation is sabotage. The effect is obvious and very well intended. Make enforcement personally dangerous. Make every operation an invitation to harassment. Make every officer a target. When the state refuses to protect its own agents, it sends a message, one louder than any speech, that enforcement is something to be ashamed of, not supported. And when enforcement becomes dangerous for enforcers, enforcement does not survive. What emerges is not reform, it's amnesty by default. Not the kind debated openly, not the kind voted on, not the kind Democrats would have to openly defend to the American people, but amnesty achieved through attrition, through delay, exhaustion, and paralysis, so that no one has to claim responsibility for the result. Every step along this path points the same direction. The collapse is not accidental, and once amnesty becomes the default, once presence becomes permanent simply by waiting, the idea of a nation governed by law gives way to something far more fragile, a territory administered by drift. That is the future vision that is produced here. Today, I want to lay out another vision before this body, one grounded not in drift or denial, but in law, order, and national survival. Enforcement in the honest application of the rules that everyone can see, understand, and live by. Law without consequence is not compassion, it is chaos. And chaos always falls hardest on the innocent, the lawful, and the most vulnerable. This vision rejects the moral inversion that has come to dominate the debate so far in the last few days here. It rejects the idea that those who break the law are the only ones deserving of sympathy, while those who enforce it must apologize for doing their jobs. It rejects enforcement by permission, supervision by activists, and amnesty by exhaustion. Instead, it affirms something older and sturdier, that order is the foundation of freedom, that rights endure only where duties are enforced, and that a people remain a people only so long as they're willing to defend the rules by which they have to live with together. This vision doesn't ask for new theories or radical departures. It asks for seriousness. It asks for the minimum requirements of sovereignty be treated as non-negotiable. It asks that the law be enforced as law, predictably, humanely, and without apology. Today, I want to lay out a framework, 4 principles, 4 ways to restore enforcement, defend citizenship, and ensure that the United States remains a nation worthy of the name, 4 legislative ideas to protect America. Each one restores something that has been deliberately weakened. Each one reasserts a basic function of sovereignty that no nation can survive or expect to endure. First, end sanctuary cities permanently. Sanctuary policies are not acts of compassion, they are acts of defiance. They announce openly that federal law will be ignored within certain jurisdictions and that those who violate immigration law will be protected from its consequences. This creates a 2-tiered system, one set one set of rules for citizens and lawful residents, and another for those who enter or remain illegally. That's why we must support my colleague, the senator from South Carolina's bill to end sanctuary cities. A nation cannot survive if its laws stop at the city limits. Conditioning federal funds on cooperation is not punishment, it is reciprocity. If a jurisdiction wants the benefits of federal partnership, it must respect federal law. Anything less is an admission to the nation that it no longer governs itself uniformly. Second, enhance penalties for illegal entry and reentry. Illegal entry is a misdemeanor. It's time to increase that penalty and make it a felony. And for illegal reentry, entering, being deported, and then reentering, we're going to meet that lawless behavior with swift, predictable consequences for that violation. It is the only humane alternative to chaos, backlog, and false hope. When weak penalties on entry allow illegal presence becomes permanent by default. Borders cease to exist in practice, no matter what the law says on paper. Third, protect our law enforcement. We should protect the men and women of law enforcement. I've heard on this floor, including from ridiculous politicians across this country, comparing our men and women of law enforcement to the Gestapo, to Trump's secret police, of a Nazi regime, of an invasion. Pump the brakes. I don't know that you actually believe it, but a lot of the people who are agitating and creating confrontations and dangerous situations on those streets certainly do. Let's recognize law enforcement are increasingly targeted. Obstruction and assault have been normalized. Weak consequences invite escalation. Modern obstruction is sophisticated now. It avoids fists, but achieves the same results. Officers are surrounded, blinded, blocked, and drowned out. Operations are shut down through violence, not through violence, but through chaos engineered to appear peaceful. Protecting officers is not about politics. It's about whether the state stands behind those who serve it. A government that abandons its enforcers invites disorder because authority that will not defend itself cannot command obedience. Law must protect those who uphold it, or it will not be upheld at all. We must pass my Protect and Respect ICE Act that increases federal penalties for assaulting ICE agents. But we must also be serious about interference and escalation tactics that are becoming more common. So fourth, dismantle rogue NGOs. There are organizations in this country, nominally quote-unquote nonprofits, that materially provide obstruction, incitement, and even violence against law enforcement. They coordinate interference. They publish officer information. They encourage confrontation. And they do so while enjoying tax-exempt status subsidized by the American people. That ends. If an organization materially supports or incites domestic violence or obstruction of federal law enforcement, it is not a charity. It is a political weapon, and it will not receive a penny of taxpayer subsidy. Taken together, these four principles don't harden the nation, they steady it. They replace drift with direction, paralysis with purpose, and apology with resolve. They move us away from amnesty by default and back towards something far more just and enduring, a country governed by law. If the Democrat vision prevails, the consequences will not arrive all at once. They never do. They arrive quietly, incrementally, under the comforting language of reform and restraint, until one day the reality can no longer be denied. Enforcement retreats. Illegal presence becomes permanent. Citizenship is diluted, not by law, but by neglect. The authority of law erodes first at the margins and then at the center. When rules are enforced selectively, obedience becomes optional. When consequences are delayed indefinitely, deterrence disappears. And when a nation signals that persistence matters more than legality, it invites exactly the behavior it claims to oppose. Borders become symbolic. The distinction between lawful and unlawful becomes blurred. And the moral authority of citizenship, earned, protected, and passed on, gives way to a system governed by drift. This is not collapse by invasion, it is collapse by abdication. And it's what happens when a society convinces itself that enforcing its own laws is somehow mean-spirited, while refusing to reckon with the human cost of disorder. Communities stretched thin, public trust eroded, and a growing sense that the rules apply only to those who follow them. Moments like this don't come around very often, but when they do, they clarify things that have been obscured for years. This debate that we're going to have, potentially over the next few weeks, will shape the next generation. Long after the headlines fade and the talking points are forgotten, the consequences will remain, written into the meaning of citizenship, the authority of law, and the character of the nation itself. No nation can outsource its future to avoidance. No society can long survive by pretending the hard questions will resolve themselves if left unanswered. Eventually, the cost of inaction becomes greater than the cost of decision. That is where we stand now. The choice before us is unavoidable. We can affirm that the United States remains a nation governed by law, or we can allow that law to dissolve into suggestion. Every subsequent generation inherits a country it did not build from scratch, and every generation decides what it will pass on. Enforcement is the quiet, necessary work of self-government. A nation that cannot say no can no longer say yes to anything that matters. Not to citizenship, not to equality under the law, and not to the promise it makes to future generations. The future, ladies and gentlemen, belongs to the countries that believe in themselves enough to enforce their laws. Thank you, Mr. President.